This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, rel-mar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and iHeartRadio. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And to find out about the programming we have available for you, 7/24/365 on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit www.xzbn.net. My guest this hour is a gentleman I've had the pleasure of having on the show for many years. Seth Shostak is his name. He's an American astronomer, currently Senior Astronomer for the SETI Institute and former Director of Center for SETI Research when it was a separate department. Joining me now is Seth Shostak. And Seth, welcome back to the X-Zone. It's been a long time.
It has, Rob, but it's great to speak with you again. Great.
Nice talking to you. Congratulations on all the wonderful things that you've done over the years, Seth. And I'd like to congratulate you on the book Confessions of an Alien Hunter and your radio show, Big Picture Science.
Well, I got to say, the book is a little old. The radio show is something we do every week, of course. So that's always new. The book I've read. The radio show, I don't know. Next week, I haven't heard it yet.
You haven't heard it yet. What's new in the world of SETI? Are we any closer to finding that extraterrestrial intelligence that you and the fine people at SETI have been looking for so many years?
Well, it's hard to say whether you're any closer, unfortunately, because, until you find a signal, all you can say is you haven't found a signal. Mm-hmm. So, but what you can say is that, well, look, if they're out there, if somebody's out there, if somebody out there is on the air, well, you could say, all right, how long is it going to take you to find those guys? And the answer to that depends on how many are out there broadcasting. Secondly, how many, star systems you're looking at with your antennas, how quickly, if you will, you're looking for these guys. And third, do you have enough sensitivity and stuff like that? Well, we don't know how many are out there, but we do know how quickly we're doing the experiment. And if you look at that, I find it an encouraging scene in the sense that I bet everybody a cup of Starbucks or Hortons or whatever that we will find ET within the next 2 decades. We'll see if that's true. But on the other hand, it could happen at any moment.
What kind of advancements have you at SETI used over the years?
A lot of it has to do with the technology, right? Unfortunately, we can sort of guess where ET might be hanging out. Just look at nearby stars, because something that we didn't know 10 years ago, but that we do know now, is that most stars have planets, right? And when I was a kid, we didn't know if any stars had planets other than the sun. Well, then we found that there were planets around other stars, and now we know that, 70, 80%, maybe 100% of all stars have planets. So planets are very common. If you pick out a star in the sky, and you can be fairly confident it has planets. We still don't know what fraction of those planets are the kind where, life might kick up. But the estimates, based on very preliminary data, are maybe 1 in 5. So, they're kind of worlds where you might have that dirty chemistry we call life. Those worlds are all over the place. What we still don't know, though, is A, how many of them actually do have life, B, how many of them ever cooked up intelligent life, and C, how many of them are on the air now, if you will.
How do we know that the bandwidth and the band frequencies that SETI is looking for are actually the frequencies that ETs would be using?
Well, you don't. You have to second guess this. Lamentably, ET never did send us that email in which they said, hey, we'll be at 1427 megahertz on the dial, and we'll be sending you, classical music, so you can expect this bandwidth. We don't know, but there are some physical laws that kind of give you an idea, right? At very low frequencies, like AM radio here on Earth, those signals bounce off the ionosphere of our planet. You know this if you can pick up a station like Chicago, even on the East Coast of North America, because at least at night when these signals bounce off the ionosphere. And so, low frequencies are probably not great for interstellar communication because they'll have the same problem at their end. Their transmitters will bounce off the ionosphere. And, of course, we have the problem on the receiving end, too. At very high frequencies, you get a certain amount of what's called quantum noise. That's just inherent in the physics of the universe. So there's kind of a range in between. It's at what are called microwave frequencies that we think, these make sense. If you want to send bits of information from one star system to another, then these are the frequencies that you ought to consider.
All right, Seth, stand by, my friend. We've got to take a commercial break. Exonation, Seth Shostak is our special guest. www.seti.org and www.sethshostak.com. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Don't go away.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Welcome back, everyone. Don't forget, starting November the 15th at 7 a.m. Eastern, we're launching our brand new channel, XZBN Channel 365. It's a news talk, music, information channel, 724 365. That's www.xzbnchannel365.com. Seth Shostak is our special guest. Once again, the websites are www.seti.org and sethshostak.com. Maybe for those who are listening to us who may have never heard of SETI before because they live in a mountain somewhere where they don't get reception just by fluke luck, they're at a local coffee house listening on somebody's computer. Tell us a bit of the history of SETI.
Well, the idea that you might find aliens elsewhere, that's pretty old. Goes back at least a couple of hundred years, probably a couple of thousand years. And there were proposals even 150 years ago to, maybe check out Mars for inhabitation. And in fact, that was done at the beginning of the 20th century. People in the 1920s were using their home radios to try and hear messages from Mars. And they actually did think that they had heard some messages in I think it was 24. It turned out that they were coming from Canada, actually, Vancouver. So those weren't aliens. But
well, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how they feel about that in BC. But, the modern SETI idea that you use the kind of equipment that really could be expected to pick up a signal if there are any. That only goes back to 1960 when Frank Drake used a couple of, he used an antenna in West Virginia, looked at a couple of star systems. And by the 1970s, it became a NASA project to actually build some real equipment to do it for real. And that was unfortunately canceled in 1993 by the U.S. Congress. Since then, it's all been run with private donations, actually. So the entire number of people in the world that are doing SETI these days is maybe a dozen. And it's largely funded by, as I say, donations. So it's a limited effort, but it's very much more sophisticated from a technical standpoint than it used to be.
Is SETI at home still a viable project?
It is, and it's still running. That's not our project here at the SETI Institute, but that is a project of the University of California, Berkeley SETI group. And they've been running that, I don't know what it is, Rob, but on the order of a decade or so.
Has to be.
And it's, and they still process some of their data using that. It's, in some sense, the world's biggest computer.
I know that you've done work at the Arecibo dish in Puerto Rico. How did that fare out after the last hurricane? Was there a lot of damage to the dish?
Well, what I've read, I haven't been there. We don't use that antenna anymore and haven't for, something like 12 or 13 years. But I'm told that there was damage, but not a whole lot of damage. So it's nothing catastrophic. By the way, if you're going to go to Puerto Rico in hurricane season, probably the best place on the island to be is the Arecibo telescope, because up there, they've got their own generators, they've got their own food supply, they've got their own water supply. It's like a monastery. You could probably live up there for months, without too much danger, as long as you don't get blown away by the storm.
Yeah. How true to life was contact with Jodie Foster when they received that signal?
You mean that signal that sounded like a pile driver hitting a pod of whales?
Yeah, that's the one, yeah.
Well, there are a lot of technical errors. The funny thing about that statement, namely that there were a lot of technical errors, is that I and many of my colleagues here were, in fact, advisors for the film. And they still had all these technical errors. We could have corrected them, but, you never get everything right. But that doesn't matter. This was based on a novel by Carl Sagan that he wrote in 1983. And, of course, Sagan knew what he was talking about when it came to this kind of work. So it's very accurate in the sense that compared to any other sci-fi film, it's a lot better.
What would happen if SETI did detect a radio signal?
Well, I think that if you were to go out on the streets of just about any city here in North America and ask people what they think would happen, 7 out of 10 of them or something like that would say, well, the government would simply keep it quiet. They would shut it all down, or maybe not shut it down, but certainly not tell the public. And the reason for that being that, people would just go nuts. I've never seen any indication that that's that there's any chance whatsoever that the public would all go nuts. But what actually happens, and we know this because we've occasionally had signals which look like the real thing, is that the media immediately start calling you up. They learn about it right away because, as soon as you find a signal that looks interesting, you start blogging it or sending emails to friends, texting all your relatives. So the news spreads extraordinarily rapidly, and within hours, the newspapers, the local radio and TV stations are calling you up. So that's what would happen. It would just be a big news story in the beginning.
What was the signal that you were part of finding or investigating that came to the closest, in your opinion, Seth, to being the real McCoy, the signal that you and everyone at SETI has been searching for?
Yeah, well, there was a case in the late summer of 1997 when I was at home having dinner. The phone rings. It's the boss here at the SETI Institute, our CEO, Tom, and he says, Seth, I think you ought to get down here to the office. When the boss calls you at home, that's usually not good news. But in this case, he wasn't giving me the pink slip. He was just giving me an incentive to come down to the Institute, which I did. And everybody was sitting around the computers because there was indeed a signal we thought might be it. And I remember being very nervous. Gosh darn, I have dinners planned this week. Lunch is not going to be able to do any of that if this is really ET. And it took us about 24 hours before we figured out what it was. It was it's the SOHO satellite, actually, SOHO. So that's a European research satellite, mostly European, designed to study the sun. And, of course, it sends its data back on a radio beam, not surprisingly. And that's the signal we were picking up. But because of an equipment failure that we had, it took a long time to figure out that that's what was going on. So it looked like the real thing, and I kept waiting for the White House to weigh in or maybe my mom to call or something. But, in fact, nobody called until, I don't know, like 10 hours into it when the New York Times finally called.
What do you think President Trump would do if he was to catch wind of that? The signal was actually verified to be that of E.T. that SETI has found. What kind of tweet do you think he'd put out?
Yeah, well, maybe they're going to help us make Earth great again. I don't know. I actually have to say that it seems that President Trump is interested in space. I don't know to what degree that's the case, but he seems to like NASA. At least that's what I'm told. This is all very third-hand information. The thing is that the politicians will probably read about this in the newspapers or see it on CNN. I guess that's a little more likely, the lack of newspapers. But, they're not going to hear it directly from their own people because their own people won't know. This is not a government project. So how do they know about it? They know about it the same way everybody else knows about it. We don't have any direct lines to any government agencies. So
with the type of work that you and the other people at SETI are doing, Seth, how come you're not government funded?
Well, that's a good question for which I don't have a really excellent answer, unfortunately. It was canceled. It was a NASA program, and it was costing a few $1 million a year. Now, NASA's budget is on the order of, $15 billion a year. So it was always like one part in 1,000 of the NASA budget. They were very relatively small. But it was very vulnerable in the sense that any congressman who was looking for some issue to present to his constituents could always point to SETI and say, your tax dollars are going to look for little green guys, that kind of thing. And there was a congressman, a Democrat from Nevada, who did that, and that ended it. Now, it wasn't that NASA was against funding SETI. They thought it was a good thing. But Congress decides what research NASA does. You can argue about whether that's a good idea, but that's what happens. So it's hard to get it back in the NASA budget. I mean, there's no law against it, but it's hard to get it back in unless you have some people in Congress who say, NASA ought to be doing this. It falls within the purview of the government to support this a little bit because it's extremely inexpensive, and it would be, absolutely remarkable if you found something because, that would change history and change it forever. But, this requires a certain degree of ability to see the bigger picture.
Do you think, personally, Seth, that there is a conspiracy by the governments of the world to suppress any information that points to the UFO phenomenon?
No, I don't think so. We've discussed this because I know that a lot of people do believe that. They think that the government is covering up on this. Now, the thing is that if that's the case, then not just the U.S. government and maybe the Canadian government are covering up, but all the governments have to be covering up, unless the aliens seem to prefer North America for some reason. But I honestly don't think that that's the case because I don't think you could hide it. If we were truly being visited by saucers that people can see with their eyeballs, in the dead of night, then I think that evidence would be so widespread. It would be very hard to somehow bury it. Yeah. I mean, everybody carries a camera around with them these days.
Exactly.
And yet, and still the evidence that we're being visited hasn't gotten any better. So, I think that if we were being visited, you would know about it. I mean, it was like asking the Algonquin Indians, in 1500, hey, do you think you're being visited by Europeans? They wouldn't have much trouble in proving to you that they were.
Exactly. Seth, I've been doing this show for 26 years. And when it comes to ufology or any aspect of the paranormal, nothing has changed in 26 years. So why do you think that this UFO phenomenon is still of such great interest to so many people?
Well, I think it appeals to us for various reasons. I mean, to begin with, people are interested in the idea of aliens. I can understand that, and obviously I'm one of them. So I don't have any problem with that. Everybody should be interested in aliens in some sense because you're kind of hardwired to be interested in other beings that might be, I don't know, have some influence on your life. Maybe help you with breeding experiments or who knows what. But, so the interest is perfectly legit. But the idea that we're being visited, okay, you see something you don't understand and you say, well, what was that, Bob? I don't know. What do you think it was? Could have been an airplane. No, it was moving too fast. Whatever. It's kind of appealing to say that you now know something that those pointy-headed guys down at the local university refuse to acknowledge. That's kind of empowering. And so I think that there's that part of it is that. But, you're not talking about a fringe belief. I mean, 1/3 of the populace believes that this is true. Mm-hmm. And, the idea that it would be kept secret just really doesn't make sense because, you have tens of thousands of scientists beavering away on this problem if they thought that if they thought there was good evidence for it.
I remember speaking to an astronomer years ago, and I said, well, what, is it possible that the astronomical societies and science would suppress the information? He said, well, they might, but what about the amateur astronomers? They'd want to get it out there as fast as they could.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fact, I mean, if somebody had good evidence and presented it to me, I usually get to, oh, well, Seth, you couldn't accept that because it would, your boss wouldn't like it. It would destroy your job or something like that. No, that's not true. I mean, if we thought that they were a foot in the land, nothing would improve our funding situation to begin with.
Exactly.
We would know exactly what to do in terms of the next experiment. Let's go check this out.
In fact, years ago, I had Arden Albee on the show. And I asked him, I said, what would NASA do if they had unequivocal proof about extraterrestrial life? He said, man, we'd run and we'd yell it from the highest mountaintop because it would guarantee us funding. Seth, stand by. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Exonation. Dr. Seth Shostak is my guest. www.seti.org and www.sethshostak.com. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and you're listening to us on the X Zone Broadcast Network and iHeartRadio.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
www.seti.org and www.sethshostak.com are two websites where you can find out about our guest this hour, Dr. Seth Shostak. Seth, always a great pleasure having you on the show. And whatever happened to that wow signal that we heard about?
Yeah, well, the wow signal made a big wow when it showed up back in 1977 for about 1 minute, and then it went away. And in fact, the telescope which was used to find it, was a telescope run by Ohio State University there in Columbus, Ohio, automatically reobserved the same direction, same frequency, same everything about a minute later and didn't find the signal. And it's never been seen since. We've tried looking, and we continue to point our own telescopes, the Allen Telescope Array. We point it, routinely in the direction of the wow signal, and we haven't found it either, and there have been other observations. So it's one of those deals where you saw it once. Mm-hmm. It was pretty convincing. It looked like the kind of thing you'd expect from an alien signal, had all the right properties, but it never came back. So what do you do with that? You just say, well, don't know what it was. That's about the best you can do. And by the way, there have been lots of other signals that look pretty good once, but if you can't find them a second time, unfortunately, it would not be responsible to say, well, we found E.T., but he went on vacation.
You and I were talking about UFOs before we went to the news break, and something that has always amazed me is that the UFO sightings that are seen at night, the people actually see the craft when it's not illuminated. And I've always wondered how that happens.
Well, that's true. Most of the sightings seem to be at night.
Yeah.
And people call me every day. They've seen something. Mm-hmm. I often ask them if they have any photos or videos because photography happens to be a hobby of mine. So if they are willing to send me photos, I'm willing to check them out and offer an opinion often.
Right.
But when you see things at night, it's very hard to tell, indeed, what they look like, how big they are. People always saying, well, it was going 8,000 miles an hour and made a left turn. No terrestrial aircraft could ever do that, which is true. But how do you know it was going 8,000 miles an hour if you don't know how far away it is, right? That's just elementary geometry. And they don't know how far away it is because they don't know how big it is intrinsically. So, these are all suppositions that are the result of what your brain does when it sees something like this. It automatically applies knowledge it knows about other things like, the motions of cars at night with headlights or airplanes in the sky that fly over. So it's unfortunate because that evidence is so poor. But, what are you going to do?
Yeah. As a photographer, how do we explain that since everyone does have a cell phone or a device that has high definition capabilities, that there are less photos of UFOs now than before everyone having the ability to have a camera?
Well, I didn't know that there were fewer than there used to be. That's news to me. But I don't know. I obviously don't have any explanation of it. Now, one thing you can say is that if they're mostly at night and they're mostly far away, well, then maybe the photos aren't going to be very good. But, I don't understand why the aliens are under flight rules to only fly at night. And by the way, if they're going to fly at night, it's always surprised me that they bother with any lights. Why do they need those lights?
Exactly.
Do they feel subject to FAA regulations? I'm not quite sure of that.
Exactly. That's an excellent question. What about Tabby Star?
Yeah, Tabby Star has been in the news for at least a year and a half now, I think. And it's named after Tabitha Bajoyan. And I'm sure I've mangled her name yet again. But she was a postdoc working at Yale University. She's now working in the Deep South, actually. And she happened to take some data that had been collected by NASA's Kepler Space Telescope on a star, which is now called Tabby Star, though it has another name, KIC 8462852 or something like that. And what she noticed was that this star, got a little bit dimmer occasionally. In fact, not a little bit dimmer, but a lot bit dimmer. By 22%. No star does that. I mean, you can look at the sun every day and, as our president has done, you can look at the sun occasionally and it'll change in brightness by maybe 1 part in 1,000 at most. Big sunspot groups or something will darken the whole disk a little bit, but, never 22%. That's just unheard of. And it's not a planet going in front of it, right, because they don't dim it that much either. So what was it? Well, a fellow at Penn State, Jason Wright, suggested, well, this is kind of a crazy idea, but of course it could be that there's some aliens in that vicinity, and they build a giant alien megastructure. You can get the instructions on the web, I suppose, to build an alien megastructure. Anyhow, a big thing, a whole bunch of solar panels, something in space that occasionally gets between their home star and us, and maybe that's what it is. It doesn't seem to be. We have looked with our antennas many times. We have never picked up any signals from the direction of Tabby stars. Some of the other SETI practitioners have done the same. They don't find any signals. And the bottom line here is that there have been some observations using telescopes, big telescopes on Earth and in space of Tabby star, and they suggest that what's really going on there is that there's a lot of dust clouds in that system, and they're occasionally blocking the light. But, it's still interesting because we're not absolutely sure what's going on.
Where is the SETI telescope array?
Well, the Allen Telescope Array, which is what we use, is 42 antennas, each of them about 6 meters, 20 feet in diameter. And they're located up in the Cascade Mountains of California. And those are, it's about you draw a line straight north from San Francisco for 350 miles, and you more or less hit the antennas. So it's in the mountains. It's not in the mountains because, the beauty of the mountains, although they are attractive. But, that way the mountains can block all the interference from the San Francisco Bay Area.
What is the difference between a radio telescope and an optical telescope? Do they both function the same? I understand that one is with optics and the other is with radio waves, but what are the different uses of these two telescopes?
Yeah, right. Well, they do both function the same way, except for the fact that, as you say, one is working in the optical regime and the other in the radio. Well, it turns out that the universe produces, obviously, a lot of light.
Yes.
Just go out at night, you can see it, unless you live downtown where you can't. But it also produces a lot of radio noise. Now, 50 years ago, people didn't really know. Well, 50 years ago they knew it, but, in the 1930s, they didn't really know that. Right, that there were also radio waves coming from space. Who ordered that? Nobody expected it. And it turns out, the sun is a big ball of hot gas, so it produces some radio. Jupiter produces some radio waves, right, because it's got big magnetic fields and stuff. But it turns out that there are lots of other things much farther away that produce very strong radio emission, things like quasars and pulsars and big black holes in the centers of galaxies and so on. And a lot of that is stuff you really don't notice if you're just using an optical telescope, where you're just, using the wavelengths of light that you can see with your eyes. So it turns out it's just another way to look at the universe, and you see all sorts of nifty things. It's somewhat like, gravitational waves. You can see things if you have a gravitational wave telescope that you can't see with any other kind of telescope. So it complements the kind of info we get about the cosmos.
I also see something here about the TRAPPIST-1 system.
Yeah, TRAPPIST-1. This was discovered by a team of astronomers led out of one of the universities in Belgium. And so they invented a very convoluted acronym that turned out to be TRAPPIST, because they have a monastery in Belgium, the Trappist monks, and they make a famous beer. So, what the hey?
Yay!
I'll drink to that. So, yeah, now this is kind of an interesting system because it's a system of planets around what's called a red dwarf star. So this is a star that's really a runty guy, kind of a bantam star, a lot smaller than the sun and a lot dimmer than the sun. But these planets are very close in. They orbit very close to it. So they're probably warm enough for life. At least 3 or 4 of them are. And they found 7. And they're all more or less the same size as Earth, right? So that's really unusual. So you got, 7 of these planets going around this runty little star. At least 3 of them are warm enough to have, liquid oceans and atmospheres. I mean, we don't know if they do, but they could. So you might have cooked up some life there. And not only that, but if there's any intelligent life, they probably colonized all 7 of those planets. So the facts are that, that's not just another planet with maybe some aliens on it. It could be a whole federation of planets with some aliens on it.
Why is NASA so focused on manned spaceflight to Mars?
Well, I think it's because the public is, to some extent. It would be as if in 1492, Columbus said, all right, you guys don't want to fund me to go, sail west across the Atlantic, but how about if I build this robotic ship? And, they might fund that. But there's something about sending people that's a little different. I mean, you can go into a classroom and say, how many of you kids want to go to Mars? And they'll all raise their hand. Then you say, how many of you want to build a robot that goes to Mars? And some of them will raise their hand. So there's a component of it that is simply our need for exploration. But there's also science in it. I mean, if you send a biologist to Mars, they'll find stuff a heck of a lot faster than a robot explorer will, if there's anything to find.
Do you think that in the future mankind will colonize Mars?
Yeah, I don't think there's much doubt about that. I mean, the future being essentially unbounded. I mean, sooner or later it'll happen. It's like saying, are we going to cure the common cold? We've never done it.
Yeah,
it's hard.
exactly.
We don't know how to do it yet, but eventually we'll. So I think that we will colonize Mars. We'll presumably go to Mars sometime in the next couple of decades, and sending colonists. I mean, it's a lot better than the moon if you're going to live somewhere, on a different world. I think it's better than the moon, but probably the best places to colonize are the orbital space around your own planet. Build giant rotating aluminum cans in space And, then you can just fill them with air, keep out the mosquitoes, and grow some food, and enjoy the views.
Yeah, I've got a conspiracy theory when it comes to the common cold. Big Pharma wants to suppress it, the research into it, because they've actually discovered the cure many years ago, but keeps us in NyQuil.
Yeah, I kind of like that. It's like, the oil industries have suppressed that super duper carburetor that allows you to get 300 miles per gallon. Yeah,
I'm sure it has. Do you, as an astronomer and a person who's very savvy with what goes on in our solar system, as far as you know, is there any proof that at any time in the past the moon actually was inhabited by a civilization?
I don't think so. I mean, you can look at the moon. You can look at the moon every night, of course. And, I have to say that idea had a lot of currency in about 1615. So, about 400 years ago, when people first turned telescopes to the sky and they saw these craters and Mari and all these things, and, people like Kepler and even, to some extent even Galileo, they thought, well, maybe those are cities on the moon. But, as soon as astronomy got to the point where they could easily determine that there's no atmosphere on the moon, there's no liquid water on the moon, right? So it's not a great place for life today. Could it ever have been better? Well, it was probably a little different, but it was never much better. And I think that if ever there had been intelligent life living on the moon, you would see that evidence, because the moon doesn't have weather. So stuff doesn't rust out. It does, the only thing is occasional meteorites will, meteors will fly in and produce a little more dust. So stuff gets buried in dust. But doggone it, if it had been inhabited, you'd see that evidence on the surface. Yeah,
and why I asked you that is because, once again, the conspiracy theorists believe that there are structures on the moon, on the dark side of the moon, and that, once again, this information is being suppressed by the governments of the world. Seth, you and I have to take our final break. Please stand by. Dr. Seth Shostak is our guest, Exo Nation. www.SETI.org. That's SETI.org. And www.SethShostak.com. We'll be back as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, right after these breaks.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Welcome back, everyone. Don't forget to find out about the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365. Go to xzbn.net. And November 15th, we launch our News Talk, Music, Entertainment Information channel, XZBN Channel 365. Alrighty, Seth Shostak is our guest. SETI.org and SethShostak.com. Seth, is there any problem that you can see as a person who is listening in for radio signals that are coming this way, that the signals that we in the broadcast industry are sending out into space could actually cause some problems?
Well, yeah, there are people who worry about that. Not so much about broadcasting, but there have been initiatives, there have been ideas to deliberately broadcast strong signals toward the stars to, elicit a response. Sure. Hey, we're the Earthlings and we'd love to get in touch, so get back to us, that kind of thing. And, there are people who have offered the opinion that this is bad because you don't know what's out there. And it could be that 98% of all aliens are peace-loving and friendly. But what if you hit the Kim Jong-un of the galaxy?
Oh, boy.
Right? and they decide to, oh, man, there's somebody on that planet, that blue planet over there, so let's just launch our interstellar battle wagons and wipe them out before they cause any trouble. Now, this is kind of it strikes me as kind of a paranoid approach to life, but on the other hand, you wouldn't want your gravestone to read responsible for the obliteration of Earth. That would be a bummer. So they say don't broadcast these things into space. Now,
yeah, but can I ask you a question?
Sure.
If you cause the obliteration of Earth, who would read the tombstone?
Well, yeah, I wondered about that myself.
Okay, just thought I'd ask.
I said it, but all right. So, but here's the deal. You can't rule out the possibility that there are nasty aliens out there. I mean, I don't know. Captain Kirk found them all the time. But what you can say is, look, if they can threaten you, if they have the technical capability to come to Earth and, wipe you out or whatever they're going to do, then they're way ahead of us, at least by, I don't know what, at least thousands of years. So they have much bigger antennas than we do. That's a very reasonable assumption. And that means they can pick up the radars from the airports. Okay, so, we've been broadcasting since the Second World War signals to the aliens. We're not going to turn off the radars at the airports or any other place. So it's kind of nutty to worry about this now. I mean, we've already told them we're here. So I would say, load up your freezer with pizzas and be prepared for the invasion.
Do you still do your monthly Skeptic Check show?
We do. We do.
Tell our listeners about it and how they can listen to it, because I think it's a great show.
Yeah, well, it's just one episode every 4 episodes, if you will, once a month of Big Picture Science, which is our 1-hour weekly science radio show. And it's not always about life in space. I have to tell people that because they think it would be, but it's not. But once a month we pick up on something that is popular and what we call pseudoscience. You might not think it's pseudoscience, but that's why we make the show. Whether it's Bigfoot or whether it's UFOs, those are obvious subjects. But there are many others, like, do vaccines cause autism and that sort of stuff. So we look at it, we say, okay, well, let's check out the evidence and what do the skeptics say and what do the believers say. And so, yeah, we still definitely do those shows, and they generate a lot of comment. Not all of it is polite, but most of it is.
So what is the Skeptic Check opinion of Bigfoot?
Well, here's the thing. Bigfoot. That's some sort of athletic competition.
It's either that or it's something to do with a girl on Blur and Young.
Yes, it may. But no, Bigfoot, look, if Bigfoot really exists, it's not that you can say a priori you can't have a Bigfoot. Well, of course you could have a Bigfoot, but if you have a Bigfoot, you can't just have one of them or 5 of them or 10 of them or 100 of them. You kind of need a minimum breeding density. Otherwise, they die out, right? A couple of them decide it's too expensive to send their kids to college. They don't have any kids, right? And then suddenly there are no more big feet. So you need at least thousands, I would think, at least thousands. Now, if thousands of these hirsute guys are tramping around the woods of the Pacific Northwest, trying to escape into Canada, if that's the case, then how come we don't see anything? How come we don't find their bones or their scat or, anything else? When there are roads crisscrossing the whole area, you never hit one with a truck. It just seems to me that the evidence is kind of poor.
Have you on your show, Skeptic Check, ever done anything into communication from the dead?
Well, it turns out you can talk to the dead. The problem is they don't talk back. But no, we haven't. Well, I guess we did discuss Harry Houdini.
Yeah.
Right, because he was looking into that possibility, mediums, and he became a bit of a debunker later in life. But he had told his wife, he said, I don't know if the dead can talk to the living or not. He said, but I'll tell you this, pay attention every Halloween, because if I can talk to you, I will try. And so she did listen, whatever listen means, every Halloween, but lamentably, her husband didn't get in touch.
Is there any connection between what you at SETI are doing and with those people who follow trans-instrumental communication, where they actually listen to white noise and look at white noise in order to try to see if there's any communication from the other side using electronics?
Yeah, it's very bad of them to use white noise, because that kind of obscures the information. If you want to be heard, you don't want to stand next to Niagara Falls, right? But no, actually, we don't do any of that. But we have lots of white noise in our receivers, not deliberately. We try and engineer as much of it out of the receivers as we can. But inevitably, it's just physics. Inevitably, any receiver has a little bit of noise in it. And, of course, we're looking for very, very weak signals. So we try and minimize the white noise.
So what's next for Seth Shostak?
Next for me? Well, it's dinner time, so maybe I'll go home. But I think that, no, what we're doing, we have a lot of projects here for SETI that are actually kind of exciting. We're looking for things other than just radio waves. We've got a project to build a device that can sort of scan the night sky looking for laser flashes, because maybe ET's not sending us radio because he doesn't know we're here, and it's just sending an occasional laser ping every couple of weeks or something that we would never have seen, and that might be just an invitation to flash something back so that they actually do set up that radio link, whatever. But there's that, and then just the inevitable improvements in the technology as computers get faster and cheaper. So I remain optimistic.
Now that's interesting. Because couldn't they also be encoding the laser with information that they want to share with us?
Yeah, you can. It's very easy to put information on the laser. Anybody who has a fiber optic, into their home knows that that's the case. You can get a lot of information down a laser beam. But even aside from just information that they're sending us, their poetry or rock and roll or whatever they're sending us, the fact that they might just have a list of millions of planets, say, that they know have oxygen in their atmosphere. So, the Klingons know that, okay, here are a couple of million planets that we know have some sort of biology. We don't know if any of them have intelligent biology, but just as a high school science fair project, we'll set up this laser that'll ping each one of these million planets, I don't know, once every 2 weeks. It really doesn't matter, just for a millisecond or a hundredth of a second, and just see if anybody ever gets back to us, just for the heck of it. And that's the kind of thing that they might be doing that we would not have noticed. So that's why we're trying to build this equipment.
Finally, Seth, if there was a giant-sized asteroid or other space structure coming for us,
right?
How far in advance would astronomers be able to detect it, and what would happen if that asteroid or that big rock was heading right for planet Earth?
Well, of course, the answer is it would not be good.
Say goodbye.
Yes. But, a lot of these asteroids we find after they pass the Earth already. Okay. So that's a partial answer to your question. But, of course, the danger is well appreciated. And there have been, there are specialized telescopes that look for these things. And we now have mapped well over 90% of the really big ones, the kinds that, wiped out the dinosaurs, for example, the things that are bigger than, say, a kilometer in size. We know most of those, and none of them has our name on it at the moment. So for the next 20 or 30 years, you don't have to worry about that. But, there was an asteroid found just this last week that was passing, not terribly far away. It was 40 meters, say 120 feet in size. And, we didn't know about it. I mean, it's just another rock, okay? And it's not a threat to us now. It might be a threat to us in 40 years or something like that. Now, you could say, what if a rock that size were to, hit downtown New York or downtown Toronto or something like that, and it would wreak havoc and destruction. That's bigger than the one that hit in Chelyabinsk, Russia, which didn't kill anybody, but if it had come straight down rather than sort of at a glancing angle, it undoubtedly would have killed people. So you'd make a very big crater. It would ruin everybody's whole day. If you have a rock that's the size of a mile across or something like that, that's very, very serious. So you do want to find these things, and you want to find them in advance. And if they're big enough, you want to deploy some rockets, go out there and change their trajectory.
Sounds like a movie I once watched.
Yes, it might be.
Seth, I want to thank you ever so much, my friend, for coming on the show. It's been way too long. Congratulations on all your successes, and thank you for doing the wonderful work that you and SETI do. So until the next time we meet, Seth, take care of yourself, my friend.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Exonation, Dr. Seth Shostak has been my guest this hour. www.seti.org and www.sethshostak.com. A great man. I've had the pleasure of having Seth on the show many times over the years. And not only does he work with SETI, but he also is involved with the educational aspect of teaching children and adults all about astronomy. Great guy. I'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and on the iHeart Radio system.